Hello, and welcome to Timing is Everything. My name is Mary Crowe, Director of Professional and Community Education at Care Dimensions. Our guest today is Pat Ahern, who is our President and CEO of Care Dimensions. And today we're going to talk about National Healthcare Decision Day. Pat, thank you so much for being on the phone.
I am delighted to be here with you, always.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, we're so excited about this. So first of all, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
I am a registered nurse, and I happen to also have an MBA. I have been a nurse for almost 43 years, 25 of those years in acute healthcare, hospitals, trauma centers, ICUs, and then the rest of my career serving in end-of-life care in 3 different cities.
You've seen a lot.
I have, and I've loved it all.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again. We're so thrilled to have you on the show. You know, and again, it's April, and this is National Healthcare Decision Day, right, which is April 16th.
That's right.
But it's also considered National Healthcare Month, Decision Month. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you know, it's kind of funny that all those years ago when Benjamin Franklin said, the only thing that you can always truly count on is death and taxes. That's the reason why they, when there was some designing for Decisions Day, it was decided to kick it off the day after our taxes are due.
Oh, isn't that
That's
great?
the reason.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
And so it's it's a bit of a trigger. And when you think about all those years later, since he said that, we are still fussing about how difficult it is to get families talking about the second life experience that we all share.
Right.
We will all be born and we will all die. And how we live before we leave is extremely important. But nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Yeah. And this is so important. And here's an opportunity that, you know, in terms of National Healthcare Decision Month, to help empower people, to help educate, and to really, you know, get them to focus on this.
I tell people that they, especially the greatest generation, these are the people that saved the world, right? They have spent their lives in service to other people, and they have a strong sense of duty for their families. And yet the one thing that they could do for their family is equip them with the knowledge and the planning that goes into the decisions about how I would want to be treated and cared for if I was so seriously ill that a cure was no longer likely, but there was plenty still to care for and about.
Absolutely. Why do you think it's such a struggle for people? What keeps them from doing this?
I worked with an Italian physician once who told me that Americans are the only people on earth that think they might get away without dying. And I think she was right. There does seem to be this this impression that if we talk about it, it might actually happen. And of course, it will happen. But it doesn't happen the day we talk about it, usually. It's kind of, I talk about pregnancy. Just because we talk about being pregnant doesn't mean we are pregnant.
Right, exactly.
And so it's the same kind of an idea, is we have an aversion to talking about death and dying. And yet it's the second and only the second experience that we will all share.
Right, right. Yeah, it's really amazing. I feel like we certainly have come a ways, right? But we still have this death-denying mentality in this country,
absolutely
don't we?
do. When I used to work in the trauma center, here would be the typical scenario. The 87-year-old would have been at the senior center during the book club class, and then would sort of faint out of her chair. Be rushed to the emergency department, obviously having a stroke. Their 2 children that were local are on their way to the emergency department. The one child that lives either in Seattle or Los Angeles, we're trying to raise him up on the phone. There's another child that maybe is traveling abroad. And the physician, when whatever family can arrives, the physician and the nurse in the trauma center look at them and says, you know, what did you want us to do? Your mother's had a massive stroke. We could certainly put her on a respirator. We need to take her to the cath lab. We need to put a pacemaker in. Maybe she needs a stent. And the sisters look at each other and they say, we never talked about it. We have no idea what our mom would have wanted.
Yep.
And so it begins.
Yes.
And it's a tragedy from that moment on.
It sure is. You know, and I see this a lot, even with the families. You know, and I have people ask me this as I go out and talk to people about advanced directives, healthcare proxies, durable powers, these personal directives that we'll talk about. And you know, it's interesting because even older adults are saying, I bring it up and I try to bring it up with my family, and they say they don't want to talk about it.
That's exactly
you know?
right.
Yeah.
I tell families to consider certain trigger points. Say Uncle Bob died,
Yep.
and we're all sort of coming back to the house after the funeral. That would be the perfect time to have a conversation about how did Uncle Bob live before he left, and is that what I would want for myself, or would I want something different?
Absolutely.
You know, sometimes there's just sort of a natural point in life when it feels a little easier to talk about these things.
And we have these teachable moments all the time, don't we?
We sure
but
do.
we don't pay attention to them.
No, and we don't seize the day.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly right.
I can remember with my grandmother when she was 92, and we would be sitting, she was into the St. Elsewhere's, all these medical shows, and I can remember sitting on the couch with her and saying, what would you want in that situation? This is what I would want. Because that's the other piece, is that, you know, there's always the focus on, it's the older people that we think we have to talk with about. We don't think, right.
That's exactly right. You know, I am not a seriously ill person in any way, and yet I have completed my own 5 wishes document, one of many advance directives. And possibly the most important part about all of the advance directives is the selection of someone who will speak on your behalf if you cannot speak for yourself.
Absolutely.
And who knows when that could be. That could be today, or hopefully it could be in 40 years.
Absolutely.
But we want to make sure that we do not assume that people will speak with our voice, especially if we haven't told them what we want.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that, again, we feel like we're losing control by filling out these documents, but in actuality, we're taking control back, aren't we? Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think you bring up an excellent point. Who we choose is critical.
That's exactly
You know,
right.
because sometimes we're picking people with our heart and not our head.
Right, right.
And that's a bad way to choose a
Right.
person who, again, like you say, who should be speaking your voice.
That's exactly right.
And go ahead.
And that person is not talking about what they would want.
Right.
They are talking about what they know you would want for yourself. And so it's someone that knows you well, can take the emotion out of the situation, and have a sense of what would satisfy my obligation to you if I was your proxy.
Absolutely. Well, and the way we know, and this is the other piece, as important as having the healthcare proxy in place is having the conversation.
Absolutely.
So we run from both, and the conversation's important. We make assumptions sometimes because we're so close to a person. Oh, you know what I want.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know unless you say the words.
That's exactly
you know?
right.
So we have to have these conversations well in advance. See, it's so hard to think you're making life or death decisions on someone's behalf.
Right.
If you've had the conversation, you're following through on someone's wishes as opposed to making those decisions.
Right. You know, and even if you can paint a few scenarios for the people that you love.
Yes.
If this were to happen, if I was in a terrible car accident, but they said that I could get better and I could eventually, you know, my priority would be to go home and to continue to be independent.
Sure.
If that's possible, let's go for it.
Yes.
If it's not likely, let's choose another way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you say, that should relieve, listen, it's still going to be hard, right? Because it's somebody that we love, but it relieves that burden of you feeling like the weight that you're having to make those decisions.
Right. The famous phrase is, it's always too soon and then it's too late.
That's right. It's not true.
And that, I hear that almost every day in my professional life. Someone says, I wish we had talked about it sooner. I wish I had known about good end-of-life care sooner. I wish I had known about palliative care and hospice care. I didn't know that if I had had an advance directive or a MOST form, I wouldn't have had to be taken back to the hospital again. Nobody told us that, and that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And everybody should have these conversations, right? So, because again, we're focusing on people as if they're older and such, 18 and over.
Right.
Right.
I think it's kind of like a planning obligation in life. When you think about it, perhaps we should also all be having conversations about whether or not we would want to be organ donors.
Yes. Yeah.
And that certainly is an appropriate conversation when you're 18.
Yes.
And so there are sort of, as you age, there are other responsibilities to consider, but there's always something that you could do to help your family be better prepared for when the unfortunate something strikes.
Absolutely. And we know, right, and I'm sure from your working in trauma and all of that, when do the conversations take place?
Yeah, the worst possible time to be talking about what you want for the rest of your life is when you're in a bunker.
Yes.
When the bad thing has happened,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you're really scrounging together your wits in the middle of all that passion and energy, trying to do what's best for Dad.
Absolutely, yes.
It's the worst possible time.
Absolutely.
The best time is when you're relaxed, you're sitting around together, and this just becomes a normal. It's as normal as talking with your family about where your safety deposit vault is.
Absolutely, right, right. You know, and again, picking that person is so critical. And the person might not be able to do it.
No.
So that's another reason to have that conversation,
right.
to say, listen, if this is going to be too hard, if you really feel like you can't follow through on my wishes, maybe you're not the person for that job.
Well, that's true, and then other things might have happened in between the time when you selected that person and the time is right. Perhaps if it's your spouse, perhaps the spouse predeceased you.
Right.
So
Yep.
you need to rewrite an advance directive. And so I think you really need to keep up with the touchstones in your life so that your plans are contemporary.
Absolutely. And things do change. You know, I was talking with a group of older adults, and the person said, do I need to refresh or update my healthcare proxy? I did it 15 years ago. And I said, has anything changed in that time? And they said, no. I said, well, that's amazing.
That's kind of
You've
amazing.
lived 15 years and not a thing has changed. And they said, no. And I said, wow, everybody lives in the same place. The phone numbers are all the same. Oh, no.
There you go.
You know?
There
So
you go.
really, of course, things change. And it's a process. Like you say, this isn't a one-time conversation, is it?
Right.
This is
That's
something
exactly
we should
right.
be doing on an ongoing basis.
That's exactly right. And the other thing is, especially nowadays, our healthcare system is a little bit more fragmented than it used to be. We probably have a couple of different doctors that we see, or the doctors change. And so we always need to remember that it's not just the family that needs to know what your advance directives are. It's the providers of your health care. That's
Absolutely.
extremely important.
Yes. So, and again, they should have a copy. So when you fill out this healthcare proxy, and again, you're putting your demographic information, signing and dating it, and making sure, because if it's not signed and dated, it's null and void.
That's right.
Then, and then two witnesses that aren't saying they agree who you chose, they're saying they know
watched
that
you sign
they
it.
watch you sign it and you know what you're signing. The other part of that is you should always have an alternate. You know, and
That's true.
sometimes people don't do that because, like you had mentioned, if that person predeceases you,
Things change.
yes.
That's exactly right.
So people have to understand that if you don't have one of these documents in place, it just doesn't get put to the next of kin,
No.
right?
Not in most states.
Yeah.
There are a few states that do have a surrogacy
Yeah.
plan, but not in Massachusetts.
Correct.
And you should not assume that it's your spouse and then your children. You'd be surprised how complicated this can
Absolutely.
get if you have not stated and have a witness document naming someone.
Absolutely. So then people are tasked with, it goes to guardianship.
It does.
Which is costly, time consuming, and it might not even be who you want to make those decisions, right?
And then in the meantime, the healthcare people hardly have any choices to make.
Right.
So it's it's a full court press then in terms of the kinds of procedures and the kinds of care that you receive because they have no direction.
Absolutely. So talk about that in terms of your healthcare team, because
Yeah.
again, it's important how we relate, how we have conversation. Because in the past, we left it up to them, right? We
yeah.
kind of have this paternalistic healthcare system where what the doctor said goes, and that's it.
That's exactly right. And I am a proponent of making sure, of course, we want our healthcare people to ask us the question, what's the matter with you? Of course we do. But I seek the healthcare providers that ask a second question. And that second question is, what matters to you.
Wow, that's important.
And that changes the landscape dramatically.
Absolutely.
If what matters to me is my recliner and a glass of Chardonnay and the cat on my lap with my favorite music, that is something that needs to be instructive to the people that are providing my care.
Absolutely. That's what I love about palliative care, Pat, is that those questions are asked, aren't they?
They are.
Here's your illness. Here are your treatment options. Here are the benefits. Here are the burdens. And what are your priorities?
That's exactly right. Because so many more things now are chronic conditions.
Yes,
We are living in a time of chronic comorbidities. So people have a lot of things wrong with them for a long time.
Yes.
And they navigate them perfectly fine with the care of their skilled providers. But those providers need to know when something changes, will any of the priorities change? And that's why these conversations are so important.
Absolutely. So again, we hit this resistance, and we've got to somehow get through this. So what are your suggestions around this?
I think that families need to really listen to the stories that people like you and people like me tell. When you hear the stories about a person that's been in the intensive care unit for 14 days with absolutely no hope for survival, and you say to yourself, geez, I hope that never happens to me. What can you do to make sure that never happens to you? I think the stories are very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and again, I think it's important that people truly understand, because you see there's myths and misconceptions all over the place, right? So whether it's the healthcare proxy about feeling like we're giving up control versus taking it, even around a do not resuscitate, often people think that means do not treat, which is not true at all.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you can certainly you can get a lot of care. And mostly the care that you need is to keep you comfortable. Once you find your way to healthcare providers that are not frenzied over the horrible thing that's happened to you, and instead have some composure about what it is that they can do for you to make sure that the days you've got left are the best they can, help you with your pain, help you with breathlessness, make sure that you've got what you need to make it through the days. Those days become very, very precious, especially as you know that you're seriously ill.
Yes.
We always say that everybody, no matter what kind of person you are, no matter what your faith, your color, your anything, we all have a similar set of final things we want to do. We all want to say, I love you, or we want to hear, I love you again. We all want to say, I'm so sorry, or please forgive me, right?
Yes.
We all want to say, don't forget me.
Right.
And so what we need to do is make sure that the quality of the days that remain are the best that they can be, so that we can have those conversations.
Absolutely. And I think people, I don't think people think about a lot of that, what you just said. It really does matter to people that they know that they had an impact on you. And they want you to know the impact that they've had as well.
That's exactly right. We always, in our family, we always had a joke that my grandmother, she purposefully left out an ingredient in her turkey dressing, in her turkey stuffing, and it wasn't until she was dying that she finally revealed the secret ingredient. And looking back, I think it's because she didn't want to be forgotten.
Yes, that's right. So, you'd have to call her up and say, "This isn't quite right."
And so you can tell the stories in a way that sort of forgive the tears, because they're great stories at the end of life.
Yeah, people need to know that their life had significance and meaning. It's very important.
And endings matter.
Yeah,
better
they really
endings
do.
matter.
They certainly do. Yeah. So it's I like people to kind of, it's because I was thinking as you were talking too, other those misconceptions even around hospice, right? And thinking again, hospice is around death, when we know that it's about life.
Right. Really what we are trying to do in hospice and in palliative care is make sure that the quality of life, no matter how much of it is left, no matter how much life is left, let's make sure that the quality is the best that it can be. And what I hear almost every other day in my career is families that have regret. They say, why in the world didn't I know about this care earlier? Why did we only have hospice for 11 days instead of 11 months?
Yes.
I hear it all the time, constant regret. And so we want to make sure that people are getting the kind of attention that they deserve, where they deserve to have it. Most people, 70% of us in America, say that we want to die at home. 70% of us do not die at home.
Absolutely.
And so when you think about that, what is it going to take to reverse that for, especially for the baby boomers that are coming, because the baby boomers, they really want to get what they want.
Right. They're a force to reckon with. And that's a good thing.
It will be great.
Yeah. I think it's and again, I'm excited about it because I think it is a group of people who really instigate change.
That's exactly right.
And that's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
I always say that it was baby boomers that changed the obstetrical world, right? It was the baby boomer. It wasn't an obstetrician who said, you know, let's all come together and be in the same room while we're having the baby.
That's right.
That was all consumer driven.
Wow.
That same consumer is coming to end of lifetime. They're witnessing what's happened to their grandparents and now their parents, and they are saying that is not what's going to happen to me.
Exactly.
I'm going to do it my way.
And you know, what's interesting is we run from what we need most. People want to talk about this. So as much as we're a death-denying society, most people want to talk about it.
That's right.
And they'll actually throw that line out to see, are you comfortable? Are you okay with my talking to you about my dying wishes, this, that, the other thing? And just to see if you can tolerate that kind of a conversation.
It's generally not the sick person who's avoiding this.
Right.
It's usually, at least in my experience, it's the family. And there's that denial. And denial is a coping mechanism too, but at some point you need to get past it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like we've talked about, people wait until crisis point. We just have to do this sooner. And then people are in a whole different mindset. As much as we don't want to talk about it, then talk about it. And again, it's not that one conversation, and we're going to come back to it. But it's not when you're in an emotional, like you say, in the bunker. This is the time to really get this out.
You're not thinking clearly when you're in an emergency department or in an ambulance or in an intensive care unit bed. You simply are overwhelmed. Those are not the best times to have these conversations.
Absolutely. So what else can people do?
You know, I think that people can certainly make sure that their families know where these advance directives are located. Don't lock them up in the safety deposit box. Make sure that there's at my house there's a blue folder in my desk and it's got advance directives written on it. So anyone will be able, the desk isn't, anybody will be able to reach in there and get it if I can't. So make sure that your family and make sure that your doctor or your providers have the materials that you work so hard to produce. Because they won't be worth anything to anyone if you hide them away.
Absolutely. I actually recently had, I was talking to a group, and one of the persons in the group said, oh, I did a MOLS form. Now, they did it on their own, and they had it in the lockbox because a family member from out of state asked them to do it. It was never done with a physician or a physician assistant or nurse practitioner. They did it, and nothing was, they signed it, but there was no really a person signing it. They weren't aware of that.
Well, and the MOLS form is especially important as your illnesses are advancing. It is, the MOLS form is really if you don't want to be re-hospitalized, the only thing that's going to protect you from that in the state of an emergency is a MOLS form.
That's right.
It's extremely important. So I'm saying, put it under, put it on with a magnet on your fridge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's where people are going to look. Emergency personnel, all of that. So again, just for the audience to differentiate, so an advance directive is that document that we put in place in advance who we would want to make those decisions on our behalf when the day comes we're unable to do it.
That's right.
Healthcare proxy, durable power of attorney, living will. Now, a living will, as we know, is not a legal document in the state of Massachusetts, but do we still do it?
It's still instruction.
Exactly.
Because people need to know your mind.
Correct.
So that they can make choices for you if you can't
Absolutely.
choose for yourself.
Those guidelines are so important, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that still your guidelines put into words. And I've seen families say, you know, geez, Mom told me that she didn't want X, Y, and Z.
Right.
She never told me.
Yeah.
You have it in writing, and it's like, no, it's right here.
Yeah.
It takes that burden off.
It takes a burden off the family, and it takes the decision maker off the hook.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because we all have the relative that's going to opine
Yeah.
from Seattle.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so it would be helpful for the people that are local to really be equipped with the knowledge that they need so that they can act in the right way.
Absolutely. Well, our time has gone by so fast, Pat. I'll tell you, we're going to definitely have to have you back on, but let me just ask you this. Tell me, if you had to leave the audience with one gem, you've given a lot, but one more gem, what would you say to them?
And again, I would say the same thing. It's always too soon, and then it's too late.
Yep.
Believe me, that is the way we think. We always think that too soon is not the time.
Right.
But once it's too late, you have a tragedy on your hands.
Yes, exactly.
And I would hate for that for any family.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Well, you know, we have, at our organization, we have these personal directive forms through Honoring Choices, and we also have 5 wishes. So I'm going to ask that they put up just a screen right now, there we go, for contact information for Care Dimensions. If you would like any of this paperwork, again, with Honoring Choices, 5 wishes, even a healthcare proxy, please contact Care Dimensions. We would be happy to share this information with you. And I want to thank the audience so much for tuning in to this very important topic and show. And Pat, can't thank you enough for being on it today.
Call us anytime. We will do everything that we can to help you and your family.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Hospice of the North Shore in Greater Boston is different in that we do more than just hospice.
It's just incredible, the services they provide when people need it the most.
So being able to offer more individualized care helps people feel more cared for.
Because it's about the patient's quality of life.
I don't think there's any place else in the Boston area like Care Dimensions.
At Care Dimensions, we'll take care of your family like you're a part of ours. Visit us at caredimensions.org.